Hello guys, welcome to my class. Today we're going to talk a little bit about writing a method section in APA style. So just kind of reminder, the method section are due on Monday, April the 13th at 12 p.m. You guys like almost a month to finish it. So don't worry about that. Also, since this then like a group assignment, you can only have one representative of your group to submit this assignment. And you can submit it to Canvas on the section of methods section. So now let's just dive into the tips to write up a good method section in APA formats. So here's an overview of what method section looks like. The method section should provide enough details to make sure that the experiment, survey studies, or whatever the research that you propose can be repeated by others who want to evaluate it or who would like to replicate the results of your study. So essentially, you're writing up the method section, tell others what you did in your experiment, what happened to participants, such as they can do exactly the same thing as you did. But in reality, because of some differences, you cannot really tell or provide all the informations that are available to you and on the method section due to limited space, because sometimes you just write things wrong. Sometimes you just don't you have to write things in a very concise way that might lead to a lot of leeway in terms of interpreting what this means in your method section, what exactly you did. But you want to make sure that you want to provide as much information as possible, so others can be enabled to exactly replicate what you did. Also, it can help the audience evaluate whether your results and conclusion are valid, because you essentially provide people with enough information about what you did in the study. For example, if you run an experiment, you probably would have the manipulation, right? If you have manipulation, that people would read about what the manipulation is like, what the participant did in terms of the manipulation. If the manipulation is a bad one, you probably won't be able to tell, oh, this is a good study that examines the kind of results. But in fact, you probably would conclude, since there is a very crappy manipulation, then this paper or the results from this paper might be less trustworthy. So we probably will just throw this away. Anyways, method section is very important. It's a very important piece for scientists and scientific community to communicate better about how they did the research. Secondly, it can help people to make judgment upon whether your results would be good or not. So the goal of writing up method section for any writers is the follows. You want to provide a thorough explanation of your study to your reader. What exactly you did. That's the key. So there are four main parts of the method section, speaking of the structure. The first part is about participants and design, or they can go separately, but since design is sort of short, you can put them together. The second part and third part are procedures and materials, respectively. However, you can put them together depending on how you would like to write up the whole method section. You can talk about the procedures of your research, and at each step, you can tell the readers what participant did. For example, what other manipulations participants were exposed to, and what are measurement the participants filled out. So those are things that you might want to consider. So let's dive into the first part of the method section, participant and design. So here are the following things you want to consider, and I wrote down some questions. For example, who is your target population? Let's say I want to study how people's reactions towards running after 15 minutes and how their feelings of happiness might be influenced by this sense of, let's say, workout, like running for 50 minutes. I want to study like just in general population. I don't care about what kind of groups. So we probably want to make it clear about what's your target population. And then you want to make sure, more importantly, to tell the readers how many participants you plan to sample, where they take the study, right? You want to have an online survey or paper pencil survey. You want to run a lab experiment or an online experiment, for example. For the non-experimental design, like I said before in the class, the rule of thumb the conventional rule of thumb would be to have a minimum of 20 participants per predictor. But I would like to say maybe you need more. Let's say you are using how much time people run to predict the happiness they have after running. You probably need 30 participants because you got one predictor, which is whether people run or not. For the experimental design, however, the minimal amount of participants goes up a little bit. So ideally you need at least 25 participants per condition. So in that sense, if you have two conditions, let's say you randomize participant to run for 15 minutes and you randomize participant to not run and sit down for 15 minutes, that means you have two conditions, right? You have a control group and an experiment group. So here in this sense, the total sample would be 25 times 2 equals to 50 participants. However, I also would encourage you to have more participants, as the more participants you have, the more power you will have to detect the effects of the IV on the DV. So you definitely want like a bigger sample to start with. So 30 per condition is recommended. If you have two conditions, that will be 30 times 2 equals to 60 participants in total. Once you figure out who are your participants, how many your participants are, you probably want to make it clear about how will you obtain your sample, what kind of sampling method. Let's go back to week 7 that we talked about sampling method. We have generally two big categories of ways in which we can recruit participants. We have random sample and non-random sample. So we can pick one of these sampling methods in order to obtain your own sample. But definitely you want to pick the one that is most doable. If you really think, oh, I probably should have a national representative sample for the study. But before you do that, you want to think about, are you really able to do it? What is the most feasible way you can obtain your sample? So that's the decision you have to make with your own group. The next part would be the sample. Sorry for that, because I thought the slide was like before. So here are the sampling methods that I trying to remind you. So we got probability, non-probability, right? You can have simple random sampling, stratified sampling. Especially this thing is gonna be very useful if you want to make sure that the sample in your group, samples that you study has the groups that are representative in the population. Let's say I want to study Cal State LA students. I probably won't be able to have everybody from Cal State LA to come to my lab. I probably will just have a small sample. But what if you want to control for the gender effect? You probably want to make sure the gender composition in your sample will match the population. So in that case, you should definitely want to have a stratified random sample. However, if you are interested in geographic locations, let's say if you're interested in election study, if you want to conduct like study about the people's behavior associated with their elections, you probably want to divide your population in a map. So you probably want to pick different states or cities or counties or different places where you think is interesting to study by randomly select from the pool of locations that you already have, and from those locations you randomly pick. You just pick everybody, or you randomly select some people from the places you randomly selected. So that's the cluster random sample. If you're interested in geographic locations, and that might be a useful tool for you. However, if you think those random sampling are very difficult or are very costly to conduct, you can think about non-probability sampling or non-random sampling. Since you might have just convenient sample of college students, your classmates, or do purpose sampling. Let's say you just sample certain people like faculties or like student workers, or you can do like quarter sampling as well. Or lastly, you can use the small sample, the snowball sampling. Basically, you ask the participants to recruit participants for you, and have everybody who finished your study ask their friends to join the study, to really recruit participants via the network of the participants. However, remember, snowball sampling can take a long time, and what is worse, you might end up having a very homogeneous sample of people, because many people might just send things, ask their friends or close others to do the favor to finish up study. And there's some research suggests that people who are similar to each other are more likely to become friends. So it's likely that people are going to end up being kind of homogeneous in the sample that we have from the snowball sampling. Lastly, you want to make it super clear about, are you going to exclude or including any participant based on special characteristics like age, gender? If you're doing those things, you want to make it clear why you are doing so. Speaking of the design, you probably want to make it clear about, are you using a non-experimental design like survey or quasi-experiment or true experiment design? Just try to remember what are the elements for true experiment design. Firstly, you need the manipulations of IV. You need random assignments of participants to different conditions of the IVs, and let's say you have control condition and treatment condition, or two treatment condition, no control condition, right? After that, you want to think about whether you have is pre or post tests. By the way, if you're thinking about between subject design or within subject design, you should also make clear on that as well. But this section can be very small, can be very short, because you don't have to explain too much about the designs. Because if you just leave the name of design there, everybody would understand that, so you won't have to worry about like being too complicated. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the procedures, which will be the second big part of the method section. So this section can be concise. Basically, it's provide an overview of what participants would do during the entire studies. Basically, it helps explain participants from start, let's say sign up for the consent form, to the finish, let's say debriefing and get their compensations. So more specifically, in this procedure session, you want to show participants how will you sampling them? What are exactly steps let's say you take to track participant, what kind of materials? Let's say you just put out flyers or send out emails over the listserv to recruit participants. And how did you distribute the survey? Are you going to use paper, pencil? Is it classroom or is it online? If it's online, are you using Qualtrics? And next, you probably want to looking at whether you are just making observations or just collect data using different equipments. Just be very specific on that. And next, we're going to talk about how many measurements or observations that participant will be exposed to, and how long the participants will have to spend in the experiment or survey. Lastly, you want to be clear about in what way participant will be compensated. Are they going to be paid money, or are they going to just be given a chocolate bar? If there's any conversation, please make it very clear. Last one would be the materials for the method section. Like I said before, materials can be combined to the procedure sessions. When you're talking about procedures, you can bring up materials very naturally and smoothly. So this section should include informed consent, operation definition of your IVs, PVs, DVs, OVs, demographics, let's say what kind of demographic question you ask. Sometimes people just say, okay, demographic questions like ages, gender, but it would be nice for you to be really clear on that. Lastly, the way in which you debrief participants should also be clarified. Let's say if you're using deception in the first place, in the consent form, you probably should say, participants signed the consent form, ask them to do this is task, which would be very boring. But in the debriefing section, you probably want to tell participant, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, we lied to you. This is something about other stuff. So you have to fully explain what really happened, what is the true purposes of the experiment or the survey. So in this section, you should just briefly provide readers with all the kinds of materials that participants will be exposed to in the study. And again, this can be combined with the procedures. So you can write a section as materials and procedures. Speaking of the materials, operationalization is a big part. Operationalization, according to what we learned before, is basically to transform an abstract construct into a doable, observable, measurable, theoretically driven procedures. So basically, you translate a very theoretical argument about construct into something you can use in a study to measure, to observe, or to manipulate the variables that you're interested in. So if you run an experiment, please try to describe your manipulations, which is operationalization for the IVs, before describing the measures of DVs. And in speaking of those measures, you probably want to try to describe in the detail for all the scales, all the apparatus, all the tools that you plan to use. Especially you want to provide information about what the type of scale is, a liquid type scale, right? And also you want to throw into the material session a few sample items, such that people can get a flavor of what your measure is like. Also, you want to cite the published measures, provide some source, make sure people would be able to look into the original scales if they want. And if the past study suggests this scale has high validity or reliability, those are things you also want to mention. So you can justify the choices of your scales because you think that scales have high reliability and validity, and that's why you would want to use it. Lastly, if there's a new scale that you created for a project, you really want to explain why you create a new scale and give us the rationale for the reason you think the new scale is necessary for you. Especially if there is anything that's already available, why not use the old one? Why you want to create a new scale? Just let us know. So, see, that's all for the master section. So please spend your time to work on it. So don't worry about it, because it's been for a few weeks, at least 3 weeks, I guess, from now. But just take your time, and if you have any questions about master sections, please let me know. I'll be really happy to help out. If you have a draft, please also send me. And I'll take my time to read and get feedback to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. So I will see you next Monday.